person, it's time for me to change language, and I might do a little bit longish introduction for Chris. I think you all kind of know him. He is, as of today, he is Director of Research for H&M since the beginning of the year, I believe. But he's best known in his role of setting up and then taking down the cyber warfare firm Cambridge Analytica. You've all heard about this. He has written a new book. It's called Mindfuck. It tells the story of his decision to become a whistleblower. He has been listed in Time 100 Most Influential People in the World, in Forbes 30 Under 30, in Politico's 50 Most Influential People in Politics, and in Business Insider's 100 Coolest People in Tech. That's a nice list. And he describes himself on Twitter as a whistleblower, immigrant, and queer. And by the way, he's banned from Facebook and Instagram. Meet Chris Wylie. Welcome, Chris.
Hi.
Nice to have you here. So, in your new book, Mindfuck, that has just been released, you talk about that today with technology and data and AI, we have the ability to change the culture, the perception of our reality, and with that we can also change politics. So what you mean is, to change politics you need to understand and change culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was one of the sort of base premise of what eventually became Cambridge Analytica. When I first started working at a company called SCL Group, which was a military contractor based in London, we were looking at, in effect, counter-extremism and counter-radicalization research, where we would look, when you look at modern security threats, they're not coming from a tank battalion, they're not coming from a missile, they're coming online, right? So if you look at ISIS, for example, it recruits online, or at the time it was an emerging threat, it recruits online, it disseminates its messaging online, and the militaries at the time, one of our clients was the Pentagon and the British Ministry of Defense, generals traditionally are like boys with toys. They like big, large phallic things that blow up, and you can't shoot a missile at the internet, unfortunately. So when we started our project, originally it was for looking at what are the indicators that lead a person to have a particular kind of profile that would make them a target for an extremist group. And how can you map the flow of that information, and how can you design intervention mechanisms to stem or prevent that flow of information? One of our clients was essentially introduced Steve Bannon to us, and this was when Steve Bannon was not the Steve Bannon, he was just editor of Breitbart. And when Andrew Breitbart, who founded Breitbart, when he created it, he had sort of this vision that he would always say that politics exists downstream from culture. So if you want to change the politics of a country, you first have to change the culture of that country. And the problem with Breitbart was that it effectively became a glorified hate blog for straight white dudes who can't get laid. And I say that, I don't actually say that flippantly, like there's something called the involuntary celibate, or the incel community, which is a big part of the alt-right. It's literally guys who can't get laid and are angry at feminists for that fact. Literally. And when he talks...
I'm sure Steve Bannon wouldn't describe it like that.
He probably would, actually. Because when he understood, like, the power of a humiliated man. And he understood that when you look at where a lot of men in America are at right now, right? They don't have the same kinds of opportunities that their dad did. Union jobs don't pay nearly as much. There's less of them. When you look at the sort of trends of women's empowerment, and this is not to say this is a bad thing, this is just a perspective, where no longer are women expected to just marry the guy next door and pop out some kids. If they want to have a career, they can go and do that, and they're encouraged to do that. And then at the same time, you look at how technology changes dating, right? Where now you have like Tinder, for example, where women can swipe left and right. Do I like him? Do I not like him? And so all of a sudden, if you're a guy and you don't have a job because there aren't opportunities for you, and women are no longer expected to just run at you and marry you because you happen to be next door to them. All of a sudden, you don't have a job, you don't have a girlfriend, you live in your parents' basement, and you're really effing angry.
And then you become a target for Steve Bannon.
And so Steve Bannon saw these people, because these were the people who were engaging with Breitbart. And these were the people who were, disseminating extremely misogynistic and hateful messaging. But the problem with Breitbart was that as a tool for cultural warfare, it wasn't making the impact that he needed. And when he got introduced to a firm that looks at how warfare can be conducted in the informational or cultural domain, which is what SCL Group did. When you think about what is a weapon, right? You have a payload, right? So let's say it's a torpedo, right? It's an explosive, right? It blows something up. It blows a hole in a submarine. And then you have a targeting system. So that might be a laser. It might track sound. It might literally be the scope on a gun, right? And when you look at a torpedo, right, if you put a torpedo on a plane and dropped it, it wouldn't be effective. Same thing if you put a gun on a submarine underwater, it's not going to be effective. So you have to match your weapons to the domain of battle that you're in. And so he started to understand that in order to engage in a culture war, he needed to design weapons for that culture war. So he needed effective payloads, and he needed a targeting system. And so when he understood that there was a firm that was working on just that for militaries, and that we were specializing in understanding what the military called YUMs, young unmarried men, who were the target of a lot of radical extremist groups in the Middle East and North Africa, well, these were the same kinds of young unmarried men. It's just, different narrative, but same guy.
So you started to work for Steve Bannon.
And so our firm got acquired by an alt-right billionaire who made all of his money, his background. He had a PhD in computational psychology, or So he looked at information systems and how you can sort of design languages with computers. And he created a hedge fund that made all of its money in the 90s because it was one of the first to integrate, rudimentary machine learning in its operations. And so you had a billionaire who understood code, understood math. You had Steve Bannon, who understood that he needed to create these sort of cultural weapons. And then you had a team that knew what it was and actually had research on that and developed prototypical algorithms that could find those people. And so we were all sitting there and we got acquired, and all of a sudden our board changes, our executive leadership changes, everything changes at the top. And all of a sudden you watch your work originally where your client is the US military or the British military, and all of a sudden everything gets inverted. So rather than trying to interfere with recruitment or interfere with radicalization, all of a sudden those same algorithms are trying to find those people to catalyze radicalization, but instead it's in the United States and it's called the alt-right.
And what did you do when you understood this?
I left.
You left?
I left. Of course. Because it's not like when your company, if you're working at a company and all of a sudden, the leadership of that company changes and they want you to work on things that are unlawful or horrifically unethical, it's not like you can go to the HR department and go sorry, can I just put on my record that I disagree with what we're doing, And after Steve Bannon came on, that's when all kinds of Russian business executives started showing up. The psychology team started going to Russia, giving presentations in St. Petersburg on how you can use large data sets to manipulate American voters. And so I'm watching all of this unfold, and I thought it was really fucked up. And I left. And I went actually after to the United States. And it's something that I talk about, in the book, going and talking with people in, at the time, the Obama administration, going, hey, this stuff is happening, right? So, you go and talk to somebody who works in the White House, for example, and you say,
What was the reaction?
Well, you describe there's people who previously worked for Russian security services. There's hackers, WikiLeaks connections. There's all of this data. We literally have cloned a copy of the United States and put it into a database, and all kinds of people have access to that. And the whole purpose is to radicalize people. And the reaction is, well, if you look at Donald Trump, he's a sketchy guy. So no wonder he has like some kind of shady business, consulting or working for his campaign. But Hillary Clinton's going to win.
So it
and
doesn't
so
matter.
it would look really bad if we were seen to be interfering in the election, because God forbid somebody interferes in the American election.
So nothing was done, basically.
So nothing was done. And it was only after Brexit and then Donald Trump's election that a lot of journalists really started to clock, like, so all this weird data stuff that they're doing, it like actually has some kind of tangible impact. And right now we're looking at like the most effed up version of that impact. But what exactly were they doing? And so, soon after Donald Trump's inauguration, I got contacted by The Guardian. And I then spent almost 2 years of my life working behind the scenes, originally with The Guardian, New York Times, then Channel 4, planning undercover filming and undercover stings of the company. Also working with the National Crime Agency, which is like the FBI of Britain, the Information Commissioner's Office, later the FBI and all kinds of American authorities, to report what was happening and expose what this company was doing. Because at the time, I watched my old boss, Steve Bannon, walk into the White House with Donald Trump, and he was sitting on the National Security Council. So on one hand, he had an entire copy of the United States on a computer, right, with algorithms designed to manipulate those people, and at the same time sitting in the National Security Council with the weight of the state and the national security services of the United States. And I thought, this is literally Nixon's dream. Nixon would have loved this.
So you exposed this. How did it feel when you actually exposed it and when it was like this big scandal? Facebook found out before the story came out because we actually went and proactively told them about it. But Facebook didn't do anything, right?
No, the first thing that they did was they threatened to sue me. They threatened to sue The Guardian. Later, the CTO of Facebook being questioned in the British Parliament, and they were asked, why did you threaten the whistleblower, and why did you threaten The Guardian with lawsuits when you knew all this was true? And the response was simply, that's how we deal with things.
That's how we deal with
things. That's how we deal with it. And the thing that was really shocking was we went to them thinking, this is on your platform, you will care about this, right? And we want to give you extra time because we're not trying to attack you. There's like really screwed up things happening on your platform, and surely you want to know about this. And when they found out that the Information Commissioner's Office was applying for warrants to go and seize servers inside of Cambridge Analytica, they sent a forensics team the day before that warrant was going to be issued so that they could go into Cambridge Analytica's offices. And when the Information Commissioner found out, she called the police, and there was literally a standoff in the middle of the night with Facebook's team that they had sent inside of Cambridge Analytica, and they were told, you have to drop all of those servers or we'll arrest you because you're interfering with a lawful investigation. And then after, when it came out, they decided, even though I was the lead witness for the police, and they were the subject of investigation, not me, they decided to release a press release saying that they're banning me. They just literally eviscerated me from the platform. And it's not just where they deactivated my account. When friends or family try to look at old messages, like I don't exist anymore. You can't find photos, you can't find old messages. And even though it got debated in Parliament, like this company has this power without any due process to retaliate and delete a whistleblower. What happens if they decide to do this at a larger scale? What happens if they decide to push the lever and start influencing people themselves?
That's exactly actually my next question, because we live in a world now where technology is so pervasive and it influences our daily lives very much. And your story is a very good example of when tech companies can actually build infrastructure and they take control of our lives, kind of. So what risks do you see? How should we approach this reality, which is it is now?
So I think you know, a lot of people, you know, we look at this and we look at it as some kind of ad thing, right? You know, when you listen to Mark Zuckerberg talk about his platform, he goes, you know, well, Senator, we make money on ads, like that. That's what we do. And oftentimes these platforms talk about themselves as services, right? We're a service. There's terms and conditions. You opt in. If you don't want it, you don't have to use it. Well, first of all, like, what kind of job can you get if you decide, for example, I don't want to use Google? Right, because I don't want to be tracked. What job, what social life can you have if you say I'm not going to have Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. Right? So first of all, it's not a substantive choice. Second of all, when you look at the job titles of people inside of companies like Facebook, it's architect and engineer. It's not community service design person, right? It's architect, data architect, software engineer, because these are products of engineering. And I think one of the biggest fundamental misunderstandings that we have currently with lawmakers is they look at it as a service and they try to regulate it as such. But they are designing architectures. And when you look at how we regulate architecture, for example, a physical architecture, one of the things that an architect has to do, they have a duty to consider what happens if there's a fire, what happens if something goes wrong in this building, what happens if there's an earthquake or a tornado or whatever. And how am I designing this building to make sure that people can escape? How am I designing this building to make sure that this wall is fire retardant, that gives enough time for an emergency service to come in and rescue people?
So they have accountability?
And when you work in software, you don't have to consider any of that.
You don't have that kind of accountability?
You do. There is no, and where it's really, for me, where it's really scary is when you look at, for example, things like Amazon Alexa, right? Or Facebook portal, Google Home, all these things, right? People are now putting like these surveillance devices into their living rooms, right? And we're calling it Internet of Things. It sounds very innocuous. Oh, it's Internet of Things, cool. That sounds like cool and widgety.
Yeah.
But when you, like, let's imagine 5, 10, 20 years from now, right? Where, you come home and you watch your TV as it watches you. And as you're talking about the show that you're watching on TV, the TV is talking to your refrigerator, and the refrigerator is talking to your bathroom, which is talking to your bedroom, which is talking to your children's toys. And they're all having a conversation about you, thinking about how you're behaving and how you're acting, and how they can all work together to change that. Where you get into your self-driving car, and it talks to the road, and that road then talks to the office, and they all have a conversation about whether or not you should be on time, depending on the subscription package that you signed up for. And what's really profound about that is that for the first time in human history, and I'm talking since we've been a species, right? We are constructing environments that are aware. And I think that's a really, really significant thing that people need to understand, is that we are creating architectures around us that think about us, that judge us, that seek to influence our behavior, where it can see us, but we can't see it. That imbalance of power creates a lot of problems, because how can you confront something that is simply around you?
But what's the right
and who is in charge of that?
For us as persons to approach this development? What should we do?
Well, I think,
we shouldn't bring these Alexas into our homes, or?
I wouldn't recommend it. When you look at the patents that these companies apply for, they're literally wanting to create in-home surveillance networks to optimize you as a consumer, and then also dominate the market that then sells those products, so that they are inside of your home and they are literally the market, and you literally live within Amazon. I think, I deal a lot with members of Congress and senators, parliamentarians. I've gone and talked with the European Union tons of times. There are lots of rules and regulations that we can put in place. I mean, this is a completely unregulated industry. And when I say unregulated, I mean, for example, take Gmail, right? Email by Google, right? So Google reads everything that you type and you receive to create a better profile for you, to optimize as ads. Imagine if, FedEx or UPS or, even the Swedish post office said, we're going to read all your mail, and then we're going to optimize our ads to you. It would be unlawful. In most countries, that would put you in jail, right? Where we have tracking devices in our phones that used to be reserved for people who were convicts of crime on release, on bail, right? All of these things where in other contexts would be completely illegal, right? The way mobile phone companies are allowed to operate, there's fair competition rules, right? If you own the infrastructure, you have to let in your competitors to compete in that. You don't have to do that if you're Google or if you're Facebook.
I know you think that governments are not equipped to deal with this.
So that's a big problem, and those are going to be things that are going to take a lot of time. I think one of the other things, though, that probably would be quicker and more impactful is action from the market itself, right? So Facebook's only big because it has people, or companies rather, spending money on it, right? Same with Google, same with all of these platforms, right? And when you look at, if you are a traditional business, a legacy business, whether it's a bank or a retailer or whatever, you are under threat from this like incoming disruption, right? And you look at how Amazon competes, it does not compete fairly, right? There's a whole slew of antitrust issues with these companies that probably will be explored. So what is it you want the market to do? Well, if you have companies starting to actually work together, right? So we're sitting here in Sweden, right? And you look at...
Could these guys do anything?
So if you look at, for example, how Sweden consistently punches above its weight when it comes to foreign affairs, right? Sweden is a tiny country. It's 10 million people?
Almost,
give or take. Almost 10 million people, okay. Yeah, all right, we'll give it a generous 10. And yet, you see Sweden on the foreign stage everywhere because, you look at the foreign policy of Sweden, it's all about multilateralism, right? It's all about working with other countries, banding together, and amplifying your voice, right? And it does so to create a, really positive benefit for the world, right? And I think that there is an opportunity for businesses, whether it's in Sweden or elsewhere, to actually start working together for two purposes. First of all of these sectors are under threat from companies like Amazon. First point. So if you care about preserving and future-proofing your business, you should care about this. But second point is a lot of the issues that are threatening people and their privacy, these are your consumers too. And if you want to advocate for your consumers and if you care about your customers, working together to challenge the monopolizing forces of big tech is perhaps a path forward. And if you look at Facebook, Facebook will take note. If you have several large companies banding together and saying, you know what, stop being a dickish company to our customers, and actually stop inflating your numbers and overcharging us. Start behaving like a proper corporate citizen.
So
they won't have a choice.
Big companies here like H&M could say to Facebook, stop being a dickish company. And if
perhaps in a slightly better, more diplomatic way.
Yes. You think that would make a difference? Then these guys could really make a difference.
Absolutely, because money talks, the market talks, and there is, and it's not just about being, a goody two-shoes company, right? Like, if you care about your bottom line, these are Amazon is coming to destroy you, right? And it is I don't know if people have watched Star Wars, but I think about it like Star Wars, right? You look at, I just published a book, right? And Random House, my publisher, one of the things that they say is they really wish they paid attention to Amazon when they were the big boys on the block, right? And so in Star Wars, you have this Death Star thing, right? It's very slow, but it's really big, right? And it goes and it can literally blow up a planet. So when you're sitting on that planet, you feel like it's big, right? Because it's the only thing that you see, right? And you might have some beef with the other guys that live on the other side of the planet, and you're duking at or whatever, right? But then there's this thing that's going to aim a laser at you and blow you up.
And those are the big tech companies coming.
And that's Amazon. That's Facebook.
That's.
And so that's fine. You can have competition and whatever on your planet, but if it's just going to obliterate it, who cares? And so when you look at how in Star Wars did they defeat the Death Star, you had a rebel alliance of planets who on their planet are probably big, but compared to this giant force are not. But banding together, you can go and you can defeat it, and then Darth Vader goes away.
So that's the way.
Sorry, I should put spoiler alert before I said all of that in case you hadn't seen it.
So that's the way. Collaborate and cooperate to be bigger and to...
Yeah, it's a very Swedish thing to do.
It's a very Swedish thing to do. We have a unique selling point there. Chris, we will meet you later. If you want, you can meet more of Chris together with Stefan a little bit later in one of the corners here. But for now, thank you very much for joining us here.
Thanks
today,
for having
Chris
me.
Wylie.
Cheers.
Thank you.